There's no such thing as sight reading. And I am not challenging the existence of the term sight reading. And I'm not challenging your right to use that term if you like to. And I'm not challenging the fact that you don't read a piece of music for the first time. And I'm not even challenging that the first time you read a piece of music, depending on its difficulty, you might read it slower and be more careful the first time than in later readings. Those things are all facts. You can read a book for the first time. And if you wanted to, you could call that sight reading the book. Although you probably won't call it that. You probably do not call it that because when you read a book, if you know how to read, if you're literate, you're reading existing words that are recognizable visually and by spelling and by sound with existing meanings, and those words are presented in sentence and paragraph structures that are consistent with existing grammar rules, which gives you predictability. So when you read a book for the first time, most of what you're reading, you're not reading for the first time. Most of what you're reading is content that you've already read before in some previous manuscript. So you don't really think of it as sight reading. A book, I read lots of books. Most of them I've only read once. I've read some of the classics more than once. I read Animal Farm in high school and then read it again many years later with better historical perspective, but I wouldn't tell you that I sight read it in high school. I'd say I read it for the first time in high school and then read it again later. So the same is true of music. I've been teaching for 36 years and 3 months. I've averaged around 100 private lessons a week for 50 weeks a year over that time period. I've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 175,000 private lessons. And over that period of time, every student, 100% of the time, who has said to me, I can't sight read, or I'm not a good sight reader, 100% of the time, it turned out that the student really just didn't know how to read music. Many students believe that reading music means note recognition. Now, note recognition is important, but note recognition is not reading. If you were reading a book and you just demonstrated letter recognition and just read one letter at a time, that would not be called reading. Most students that I know and have met, when they read music, they attempt to read single notes, read notes one at a time, and then they move on to mindless technique exercises to drill in the rhythm. Well, if you're doing that, the problem isn't that you're not a good sight reader. The problem is that that's not even called reading. That's not how you read. When you read a new piece of music, the notes are not meant to be recognized individually. Every note is in context of a scale or a chord, either diatonic or symmetrical. And those scales and chords have existing and predictable spellings and sounds. They can be recognized visually. They are presented in a roughly predictable order based on functional harmony, which you can sort of parallel with grammar rules when you're reading English. And so when you're reading a new piece of music, most of what you're reading, if you know how to read, is material that you've already read and learned before, visually and by spelling and by sound in some previous piece of music. So you have the benefit of past knowledge and experience. So the real thing that you're reading, the true variables when you read a new piece of music are typically the rhythms. And even the rhythms, after a while, if you shift your focus from the notes to the rhythms, even the rhythms and the rhythm patterns become predictable based on past experience pretty quickly. I mean, how many times do you have to count 4 quarter notes in a row before you just know what 4 quarter notes sound like? So even the rhythms, for the most part, become predictable if you become musically literate. So this is why I suggest to my students that, as opposed to just memorizing the technique and learning to play a scale, that they instead learn to visualize the scale so they recognize it when they see it, to learn the spelling for the scale so that once they recognize it, they can predict the notes, and learn the sound of the scale so once they recognize it, they can predict the sound for tuning, so that then the scales or the chords arpeggios become the words in the musical language. And then when you're reading music, you have the benefit of past experience, the same as if you're reading a book for the first time, and you probably won't think of it as sight reading anymore. It's just reading. My name's Mark Dooley. I've been a private music teacher for 36 years, focused on practical theory and music literacy. If you'd like to hear more, follow me. If you like lessons, contact me. If you can learn how to read words, you can learn how to read music.